Well, let me start the meeting then with a very, very brief introduction. I think many of you know that LJ has been doing our series on the Mystics since what, 2017 we decided, I think, since the very beginning. And always a wonderful presentation. That's why we keep asking him back. But anyway, he's now the director of faith formation at the cathedral in Washington, D.C., and also formation. So we're looking forward to hearing about three extraordinary women mystics. LJ, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thanks,
Oh,
Peg. I'm very.
one,
Oh,
one thing, one thing I was supposed to say, I forgot to say. Um, we're going to play, whether it be in person or Zoom, by the weather. So we're being in person unless the weather is on, what we have right now. Okay, LJ, sorry.
all right. No problem. Weather's important. Got to be aware. All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me back. And as Peg said, we're going to dive into some wonderful female mystics this time. So let me start sharing my screen here. And the first lesson is, how do you say her name?
Hadewijch.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure. But I think you can say safely Hadewijch. Hadewijch. So the
Really?
E is sort of silent, the W is like a V, and the
Okay.
JCH is like a G.
Thank you.
Hadewijch of Antwerp. She was Dutch. We think she lived in the region of Antwerp. It's kind of modern day Holland. But a word first about the series. We're going to talk about three Beguines. And the Beguines were a certain movement in the Middle Ages that gave women an option when their only two options was you can be a nun or you can be a wife. So the Beguine movement was a really flexible and freeing movement for women in the Middle Ages, and it started in the kind of low country area, we think. So Hadewijch may have been among the first of these Beguines, maybe the first or second generation, and she was a leader of them. But Hadewijch is the first. Next week, we're going to look at a German woman, Mechthild of Magdeburg. And then the last session we do will be on Marguerite Porete. So a Dutch lady, German lady, and a French lady. And all these three women, these three mystics, are really all about this. They reflect on, they evoke, they try and communicate to us their experience of love. So as you're listening to the lecture tonight, start to think to yourself, what do I mean by love? How do I understand love? And not just my love for like my family and my friends, but God's love for me and my love for God. And what is that love like? So to get us into that, let's head into prayer. And for our prayer, we're going to read. I'll read it out loud and you can listen. Hadewijch was a poet. We're going to read her poem number 34, Becoming Love with Love. Okay, so I invite you to close your eyes, take a deep breath. Place yourselves in God's presence. And you can follow along or just listen. In all seasons, new and old, if one is submissive to love, in the hot summer, the cold winter, he will receive love from love. He shall satisfy with full service in encountering high love. So he speedily becomes love with love. That is bound to happen. Bitter and dark and desolate are love's ways in the beginning of love. Before anyone is perfect in love's service, he often becomes desperate. Yet where he imagines losing, it is all gain. How can one experience this? By sparing neither much nor little, but giving himself totally in love. Many are in doubt about love. Love's labor to them seems too hard. At first, they receive nothing in it. They think, should you wander there? If their eyes clearly saw the reward that love gives at the end, I dare indeed say openly, they would wander in love's exile. In love, no action is lost that was ever performed for love's sake. Love always repays, later soon. Love is always the reward of love. Love knows with love the courtly manners of love. For receiving is always giving. Not least she gives by her adroitness many a death in life. It is very sweet to wander lost in love. Along the desolate ways love makes us travel. This remains well hidden from aliens. But they who serve love with truth shall in love walk with love, all round that kingdom where love is lady, and united with her receive all that splendor, and taste to the full her noble fidelity. Just take a moment, review this page. Got 5 more stanzas. In case you see a phrase or a um, series of words you like, pique your interest.
I think the ending phrase of stanza 5 is really beautiful.
Mm.
To taste to the full.
Taste to the full her noble fidelity. Yeah, good. All right, I'll give you 5 more seconds. And you'll get these slides, so you can
I'm
certainly.
interested in the often becoming desperate.
I was hoping somebody would say that one. Good. I think we'll get more about that, Beverly. Don't worry.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, place yourselves again in God's presence. Take a deep breath. And the rest of the poem. As for the tastes that fidelity gives in love, whoever calls anything else happiness has always lived without happiness, to my way of thinking. For it is heavenly joy, free, to the full, devoid of nothing. You are all mine, beloved, and I am all yours. There is no other way of saying it. I can well keep silent about how it is with those who have thus become one in love. Neither to see nor to speak is my part, for I do not know this in itself, how the beloved and the loved soul embrace each other and have fruition in giving themselves to each other. What wonder is it that grief strikes me, because this has not yet fallen to my share? That I was ever short of love causes me sadness. That is no wonder. Rightly do I suffer pain for it, that I ever descended so low. For love promised me all good, if I would conceive the high plan of working in the realm she assigned me, in her highest possible service. That realm to which love urges me on, and the service she commands us to perform, is to exercise love and nothing else, with all the service this entails. He who truly understands this, how to work in every respect with fidelity, is the one whom love completely fetters and completely unites to herself in love. To this I summon all the perfect, who wish to content love with love, thus to be in love's service in all her coming and in all her goings. If she lifts them up, if she knocks them down, may it all be equally sweet to them. So will they speedily become love with love. In this way, may God help us. So again, review these stanzas. See if there's a word or a phrase that catches your attention or piques a question in you.
Well, I love in stanza 10, if she lifts them up, if she knocks them down. May it all be equally sweet to them.
Yeah.
And that fits with my experience. So it's
Harkens to John of the Cross a little bit too.
Uh-huh.
Okay. All right. I invite you now just to take a moment of contemplative silence. Close your eyes. Let go of all your thinking. And just be with God for a moment. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. So that's a little taste of her mysticism, of Hadewijch's experience of God. We'll just spend the rest of our time together unpacking some of those ideas and seeing what she has to say. So who was this lady? Who was Hadewijch of Antwerp? Well, there she is. We don't know much. She was most likely a Beguine, which is a lay movement of women dedicating themselves to prayer and service. We'll get more into the Beguines. She was living in the first half of the 13th century. So she lived, roughly, we think she was born, say, maybe sometime before 1200 and lived into the mid 1200s in the vicinity of Antwerp, which is modern day Holland, or it's the Dutch, right? She may have been in charge of a Beguine community. We think she wrote her poems and letters, and she had visions. We think she wrote those because she was trying to communicate her experience to other women in the Beguine community. She may even have lived a wandering life, very unusual. European society in the Middle Ages wanted women in either the home or the convent, not wandering about, right? As I just mentioned, she wrote in several genres. She wrote poems and couplets, poems and stanzas, letters, visions. She's really a master of many different genres. But her all-embracing theme, as you already know, throughout her many writings, is love. Or in Middle Dutch, which is the language she wrote in, minne. Minne is her theme. So she's a sublime exponent of love mysticism, contending that God allows God's self to be experienced as love by the person who ardently desires unity with God in this life. The main theme throughout her writings is the tumultuous longing for the infinite joy of possessing this God who is love. So she's taking the normal human experience of love. Do they like me? Don't they like me? Oh, they're absent and I long for them. That kind of tumultuousness, and transferring it into the love relationship with God. Because at times, maybe you can relate, you'll feel loved by God. God is present, God is here, life is good. And then where'd God go? I'm left longing for that experience again, right? Her name and her writing suggest a woman of exceptional spiritual depth and intellectual rigor. But how she arrived at such a profound relationship with God, how her experiences shaped her view of the world, far from clear. Historians do not agree on the precise details of her birth, the nature of her family life, or her early formation. She clearly could write and read. So that suggests she was of noble birth, but we don't know. We can surmise. It's very unlikely that she would come from a lower class, that she could write. She cites. She doesn't really cite them, but her writings have allusions to Saint Augustine. You don't just read Saint Augustine when you're basically a medieval peasant, right? It's probably from the noble part of life. So what is most striking, however, is the sheer absence of any concrete biographical data. We know she lived in Antwerp, again, likely in the 1200s, associated with the Beguines. This is, again, just to give you a little bit more, we're going to have a whole slide on them. They lived outside the formal structure of any religious order, monks, nuns. At this point now, there are friars. St. Francis and St. Dominic have the Franciscans and Dominicans. All those groups had rules, and those rules meant they were sort of under the thumb of the ecclesiastical authorities. The Beguines were not. They were rather free. There was a male counterpart, the Beghards, but they weren't as popular. Hadewijch's ability to articulate her mystical experience with such precision suggests that her early years were marked by a thirst for spiritual understanding, a hunger to understand and know God intimately. So that's really about as much as we can say about her. Who knows when, at what point, she had a deep or experienced a deep longing to know and love God. That's all we can say. And that longing led her to a deeply intimate and transformative relationship with the God who is love. So who are these Beguines? And we can certainly talk more about this movement over the next few weeks. But here's a good introduction to them. So she was connected to the movement. And these, again, were women who chose to live together, all freely consenting. I want to move in with this group of women. And they were dedicated to spiritual practice. So prayer, works of charity, personal piety. But this is, maybe it's hard to understand, but they took no vows. Marriage vows, religious vows. I mean, it meant, in essence, they were not ruled. We have to kind of caveat this in a lot of ways because the Middle Ages weren't as misogynistic as we think they were. There were a lot of men and men's movements who were deeply appreciative of the Beguines, but a lot of church authorities, the caricatures are right in many regards. So it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit more complicated than they all sucked. Now there were certainly a group who were more grasping and controlling, and then there were others who were more supportive, right? But this is insane. They were not controlled conceivably by any man. In the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages. That's pretty impressive. They had certainly confessors, priests who would come and work with them. But if they didn't like them, presumably they could just say, yeah, you're fired. We'll get somebody else. I mean, they didn't have to necessarily go with the people that they didn't like, at least at first, because ecclesiastical authorities, bishops got very uncomfortable with this movement. But they didn't live in cloister. Okay, they didn't live in cloistered isolation. They were free to move in, to move out, to move into the community, to live alone, work independently, but they were bound by this common spiritual commitment. So it arose again in the early 13th century. This is the same time period. The Beguines are arising at the same time as the Franciscans and the Dominicans, the Augustinians, and the Carmelites. All of these movements are happening because the medieval church could not fulfill people's spiritual needs. They were too concerned with worldly things more often, and the monks and the nuns were sort of outside of people's lives. So people were congregating in towns, and they didn't necessarily have any connection other than to maybe a priest who didn't know what he was talking about because they weren't necessarily educated. So its appeal was strong, the Beguine movement. Especially among women who felt called to a deep spiritual life, but not called to the restrictions of monastic life. So for many, it was a way to live out their radical commitment to God without the constraints of a lot of worldly expectations. You know, if I'm a medieval nobleman or maybe lesser nobility in the Middle Ages, I would have a certain number of children and always the firstborn male son. He's my heir. The second-born male son, likely, let's send him off to the monastery or become a priest. But it wasn't because he had a vocation. It was because I want to get this guy into the monastery. Maybe he becomes the abbot. That extends my family's power. Okay, I have 2 daughters. Okay, let's try and marry them off. If they don't marry them, let's send them to a nunnery. At least they'll be safe there, and maybe they can rise the ranks too. it had nothing to do with individual choice or whether someone was at a calling, right? It was mostly at the whims of the patriarch of the family. So again, the Beguines were women who lived together in religious communities without taking formal vows. They were not bound by the same restrictions as nuns, which is just insane. Free to engage in a variety of activities, teaching, healing, writing. Some of their early documents show that they were allowed to teach. So that's why we have Hadewijch's writings. She wrote this stuff down to hand out to her community. The Beguines were, in many ways, pioneers of a more active, independent role for women in religious life. Hadewijch was not only part of this movement, but a leader and a voice within it, guiding other women to embrace their spiritual authority and encouraging them to pursue their own relationship with God without the constraints of ecclesiastical oversight. So, of course, it only lasted about 100-something years. Well, the popularity of the movement contracted a lot, especially after a few church councils. But it lasted actually a little bit longer than that, probably quite a while. But it got very, very, very small. I think it only existed in Holland for a little while. There might be some houses there still, but the popularity fell off a cliff really after the mid 1300s. All right, let's just say a few remarks about her own mystical experience. Love, a dynamic, living force capable of sweeping the soul into unity with God. That's her testimony. It's the central motivating factor for life. She experienced God's love, not with quietude. So don't think, last year I think we did John the Cross, right? John the Cross did, despite his dark nights, had a lot of quiet and silence. Hadewijch has passion, intensity. Love is both overwhelming and deeply joyful, a paradoxical blend of rapture and suffering. The fire of love was not gentle or easy. It was fierce, an all-consuming flame, intended to purge the soul of its imperfections and draw it almost violently drag it into the heart of God. Love breaks through the boundaries of human understanding and evokes our complete surrender to the madness of love. That's one of her themes we'll get into. So love requires sacrifice and the willingness to endure spiritual desolation. So Beverly, that's a little bit of a hint at what she means by getting desperate. You will feel her experiences. You get into the prayer relationship with God. You pray over a long time. You will feel like, where's God? You'll feel desperate at times because you'll have this darkness. It's kind of her theme, her way of putting the dark night of the soul. She often spoke of moments when she felt abandoned by God or when her soul was filled with darkness. These were moments of purification, necessary steps on the path to deeper union. But the soul's desire for God, that's central. It would sometimes lead through periods of trial, darkness, absence. But these experiences were really essential to deepening the love between soul and God. The more the soul was refined, the more it could receive the full force of God's love, the more intimate with God it would become. And poetry, you experienced already one of her poems, one of her best ones. Poetry is so great because it doesn't tie her down. There were several conflicting thoughts in that poem. And you just heard her say again and again, love for love, love with love. I mean, she's in her very poetry caught up in ecstasy at the mere mention of the word. So she can describe love in a multitude of ways because it's not one note. For her, it's 3 million notes, the experience of God's love. All right, so let's get into the nature of minna, love. So here's a very short poem. O love, were I love, and with love to love you, love, O love. For love, grant that love may know love holy as love. I'm sorry, I get a little kick out of that. But let read it one more time, okay? O love, were I love, and with love to love you, love. O love, for love, grant that love may know love wholly as love. And then separately in a letter, I think she just says, love is everything. So she's she's obsessed. I mean, I think you can say that. In a really good way, she's obsessed with love. I want to love with the love that is God. So at the bottom there I say, the love with which you and I love God is the love with which God first loves us. And that is simply God. And not just an attribute, right? You could say God is omnipotent, God is omnipresent. The very nature of God, the Trinity, is love. And she wants to be consumed by that love. You can think of that line from Hebrews, our God is a consuming fire. She might say our God is a consuming fire of love. So Minna, that's Middle Dutch for love. Love is mysterious, but the very meaning of existence. So this is what her poetry allows her, even in her letters and her accounts of her visions. Love is God, or the Son, or the Holy Spirit. And it's also the experience that you and I have of God. So from the human perspective, love is the experience of being subjected to this overpowering force, and it's our response to it. So in other words, every experience you and I have of love is divine. And it can be God in general, or the Father, or the Son, or the Spirit. She expresses God's transcendence, God being God, beyond us, and immanence, with us, within us, close to us, using 4 paradoxes. God is above all and unelevated. God is beneath all and unabased. God is within all and entirely uncircumscribed. God is outside all and completely comprised. Meaning, God's beyond us, but not disconnected from us. God's within us, yet isn't just us, right? She's trying to get at how this love is all-encompassing and your deepest reality. Higher than the highest mountain, closer than you are to yourself. So she has a few main descriptors in her poems and in her writings for love, for Minna. Desire. So just linger for a moment on each of these words, okay? And desire here, the desire to love and to be loved. The desire simply for love. Whether or not you feel loved. I mean, maybe the closest we can get is if we're parents, I love it when my kids hug me, but do they always hug me? No. I want them to. But the desire there is just for their good, to be with them, right? Passion. Love is passion. It's intense. It burns us up. It's a burning in the chest that fires this desire, right? It's ecstasy. Now, ecstasy is a word that is from Latin, and it's ekstasis. These 2 Latin words combine, and literally it means outside of the self, standing outside of the self. So ecstatic love is what brings us beyond ourselves to the other, to accept the other, as different from us, and yet intimately connected, right? That allows that leap in passion and desire. Love is incomprehensible because it's God. So notice, yes, there's an emotional aspect to love, of course. She doesn't stay there. She goes beyond emotion and beyond thought. Love is nothingness. Love is beyond the bounds of existence itself. Love is overwhelming. She'll say that frequently in her poetry, love has a demand. Love is demanding of us and demands that we let ourselves go entirely. Love is madness. And maybe you can identify with that a little bit. So there's something about us when we're in love, right? We sort of change, and all of a sudden, all of our thoughts go right to our beloved, right? We're driven out of our minds, literally. That's what's happening in the madness of divine love. So she speaks of God's unfathomable love, contending God allows God's self to be experienced by love, right? So this theme of tumultuous longing, as we've already said. She writes, to carry love means a propensity, a longing, a desire, a service, an incessant exercise of burning will. Hold on to that phrase for a second. That's one of the best descriptions of love I've ever heard, frankly. An incessant exercise of burning will, meaning I have to constantly choose to love. Constantly choose, because it doesn't always feel good, does it? Those of you who are parents, don't have to be a parent, right? If you have a friend and you're friends now, likely that friend has let you down at some point. And it's not because they're bad or they're wrong. It's just because they're human, right? I just spent a weekend with like three of my best friends. One of them was up in New York, in near the Lake George, and I thought it was going to be so much fun, and we laughed and we had a good time. It was a little disappointing though. It's because I realized we're all we're middle aged now, and we're all just kind of tired. So we didn't have the same energy we had when we all went to college together. I thought we'd have a grand old time. We all went to bed at like 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock. Maybe that's late for some of you, but that seemed early to me. I thought we'd maybe drink into the night. I could do one beer. So, and I have to choose, right? In that moment, then, do I just, well, this wasn't a fun time. Forget these guys, right? No, they're my friends. Choose them. But it's a burning will. There's still a passion there. And you can have a passion for your friends, for your family. It's not just erotic passion, right? And it just is, I want to know these people. I want these people in my life. That's it. An incessant exercise of burning will. That's a good phrase to hold on to concerning love. So she continues, but to feel love means the awareness of being in the liberty of love. So feeling love, that's good. That means you're in the freedom of love. But then she says, but to be love surpasses all. So there are times I have to choose love. There are times I'm going to feel love and feel free, but I have to be love. And she'll eventually say that means being Jesus. To be love is to be Jesus in the world. She stresses the nakedness, the pure simplicity of the exchange between God and humanity. It isn't about experiences or even high emotions. It's just about that bare naked meeting of God and the human spirit. And she says, God, well, only the soul can reach God's abyss. And only God can satisfy the abyss of the soul. Abyssus abyssam invocat, right? That's the Latin for the first line of Psalm 42. One abyss calls out to the other abyss. This is a very protracted theme in Christian mysticism. The abyss calling out the other abyss. One abyss is the soul made for the infinite, so in some regard infinite. And the other abyss is God, who is infinite in depth and in width, beyond all of our understandings. But that satisfaction for God and the soul are found in each other. That's love. So Minna is the unfathomable nature and incomprehensible fascination of God. And I would say of us for God, that we are fascinated by God, but also God fascinated by us. Unfathomably, incomprehensibly in love with us. That's Minna. So in poem 16, a poem is too long to read at this point, she gives 7 names to love. So let's look at those. She calls love a bond or a chain, which she says is the experience of being enchained by love, connected cosmically. A madness, and she compares this to Eucharist, wherein we're consumed by God in Christ. Even though we consume, we are the ones who are actually consumed by God. Love is light. It's our enlightened reason that needs to understand, how do I love? To make that choice. Love is a live coal, that is a coal that's on fire, which emphasizes how the madness of love purifies by fire all of our contradictory behavior. Love is fire, burning away distinction, burning away the distinction, the thin film that sometimes separates us from God and fuses us with God by its flames. Yet love is a dew, gentle in our union with God, and the person after the violent fierceness of love is fire. Love is a living spring, God ceaselessly flowing out into us and flowing back into the Trinity, drawing all things back into the divine source, which is as a living spring that's dynamic, it's movement. God isn't like a statue, but living and breathing and moving, right? Here's the best name. Love is hell. Love is hell. You all know that. The highest name of love, she says. Love is hell. Love as hell signifies love causing us to lose ourselves in the deepest darkness, being engulfed by the unfathomable nature of divinity, utterly overwhelming us, and leading us into desolation. Again, into that desperation we were talking about with the first poem we read. Love is hell. So let's get into a little bit of that. Let's read. I want to try and expose you to some of these ladies' mysticisms with their writings. So here's one of her poems, The Madness of Love. So settle in. Joyful now are the birds that winter oppressed, and joyful in a short time will be, you must thank love for that, the proud hearts who too long have borne their pain through confidence in love. Her power is so effective that she will give them in reward more than they can conceive. He whose wish it is to receive all love from high love must seek her gladly, no matter where, and dare the worst death, if love destines him for it, being always equally bold, whatever noble love commands, that he may not neglect it, but be ready to perform it. Alas, what then will happen to him who lives according to love's counsel? For he shall find no one who understands his distress. With unfriendly eyes, men will show him a cruel look, for no one will understand what distress he suffers until he surmounts his distress in the madness of love. The madness of love is a rich fief. Anyone who recognized this would not ask love for anything else. It can unite opposites and reverse the paradox. I am declaring the truth about this. The madness of love makes bitter what was sweet. It makes the stranger a kinsman, and it makes the smallest the proudest. The madness of love makes the strong weak and the sick healthy. It makes the sturdy man a cripple and heals him who was wounded. It instructs the ignorant person about the broad way whereon many inevitably lose themselves. It teaches him everything that can be learned in love's high school. In high love school is learned the madness of love, for it causes delirium in a person formerly of good understanding. To one who at first had misfortune and now gives success, it makes him lord of all the property of which love herself is lady. I am convinced of this, and I will not change my mind. To souls who have not reached such love, I give this good counsel. If they cannot do more, let them beg love for amnesty and serve with faith according to the counsel of noble love, and think it can happen. Love's power is so great. Only after his death is a man beyond cure. High-minded is he who becomes so fully ruled by love that he can read in love's power her judgments on him. There's the madness of love. Love demands all. Because of the madness of love, we're willing to be consumed so completely and violently. Everything about a conventional life is ruined for us. All that matters, beyond even whether I feel happy or sad, afraid or amazed, all that matters is divine love. Madness is when we're driven out of our minds. Love drives us mad. It drives us right out of our minds. That is, out of all thought, out of all experience, right into the mystery of God. Mad love is ecstatic beyond the self. For Hadewijch, love was not something neat and tidy, but something wild, overwhelming, intense. not sentimental love that many expect in religious writing, but a fierce, all-consuming force that could shake the foundations of our souls. Her mysticism was not quiet or placid, but radical, bold, insistent. It demanded everything from the one who sought it, offering nothing less than the transformation of the soul into a vessel of divine love. Jesus, of course, still has a place. She stresses Jesus as our only way to God. She says we must practice living God and man, which means to be following the example of Christ so that we can be God with God. That's her phrase, one of her phrases for unity with God. She especially sees sharing in his suffering as central to following him, which means receiving joy in lack, joy when God is absent or when things that we want are absent. She's suggesting that common human experience of being human, with all the suffering implied, especially the suffering of feeling God absent, all of that is an integral to union with God. She is very clear. Jesus' way is all love. To live God and man, that's her phrase for following Jesus. To live God and man is the way of love. So she reflects on Jesus' life as a life of minna. She writes, Jesus worked with vigilant charity, and he gave to minna all his heart, all his soul, all his strength. This is the way that Jesus teaches, and that he himself is, and that he himself went, and wherein are found eternal life and the fruition of the truth of the Father's glory. Fruition means simply enjoyment. So it's the enjoyment of the truth of God's glory. That's what love is. Jesus' way of minna is to follow Jesus in his suffering, particularly, as we just said, that common human experience of feeling God's absence. Where's God? That's a part of the way of love. What she calls receiving bliss in absence. That way of sharing the suffering of Jesus is receiving bliss in absence. So as I just said, the common experience of being human with all its suffering, especially the pain of God's absence, is integral to true mystical consciousness. The recognition of God's presence in absence, the realization of the joy that can be found in the midst of suffering. The suffering here is, I'm suffering because God, I don't feel God, because I don't know where God is, because God seems to me to be absent. That's the suffering. Or maybe it's the suffering of, in my experience in a certain time in my life, I feel utterly disconnected from God. Where, you might be asking yourself, where is God? You might look at our country and go, where is God? That's a legitimate question. Very legitimate question. And for her, it's a question that arises from love. When we live solely for holy minna, out of pure minna, then we are identified with Christ crucified. So we'll get to this in a few slides, but whenever you do something simply out of love, whether you feel it or not, you are living the way of Jesus. You all know that, I'm sure, right? I'm not saying anything new, but she's trying to make this really not bare knuckle, but really down to earth, really down to earth. Her mysticism seems kind of high and abstract at times, but just focus on the things you can do out of love, for holy minna. Of course, she finds a locus for living God and man in the Eucharist. All these female mystics, gosh, from Hadewijch to probably in like the 16 or 1700s at least, most women mystics in the church have a deep fascination with the Eucharist. She writes, when we eat Christ, he eats us, for the heart of each devours the other's heart. We become God with God by living God and man. We all indeed wish to be God with God, but God knows there are few of us who want to live as men with his humanity, or want to carry his cross with him, or want to hang on the cross with him. So to be divine we have to be fully human. And to be fully human is to undergo feeling like God's distant and absent from my life, just as Jesus felt on the cross, right? So, our last section here, united to the unity of the Godhead. That's one of her phrases for the goal of the mystic's life. She writes in one of her letters, love whereby God and the blessed soul are united in oneness. To this lofty surrender, holy love at all times exhorts the noble, proud souls who are willing to understand it and cast away all things for the sake of love. Minna leads to unity, unity with the Trinity. This unity is beyond two persons coming together like in marriage, that one that respects distinctions. Unity with Minna transcends distinctions, transcends differences. Love swallows us whole. Indistinct unity is the goal of the mystic's quest. She writes, let us live in sweet love. Live for God. Let his life be yours. The loving soul, she writes in letter 9, and the divine love, almost in letter 9. The loving soul and the divine love live in each other, and, here's the quote, neither of the two distinguishes himself from the other, while one sweet divine nature flows through them both, and they are both one thing through each other. But at the same time, both remain. Yes, and remain so forever. So most mystics will try and find a way to say, we're so one with God, there's no difference, and yet we're still ourselves. At times, she expresses unity with love as giving up love for love's sake. We must wholly forsake love for love. He who forsakes love for love is wise. It is all one, whether we die or live. To die for love's sake is to have lived enough. Alas, love, you have long driven me to extremity. But in this very extremity to which you have driven me, I will keep vigil, love, in service of your love. Beyond all enjoyment and with deep longing, she gives up the experience of love for holy divine Minna. And it's an annihilation. And in that annihilation, she, in some of her writings, she will even say, I am identified with the Father or the Son or the Holy Spirit. But it's all because of God's love, God's Minna. I'll let you read this on your own. We're running a little bit out of time. Let me get to these other two slides. So this is Vision 11. She has several, about 20 visions that she writes about. That is, she claims she was caught up in the Spirit and experienced some spiritual understanding from God. And in Vision 11, she says she experienced the abyss of omnipotence. And she sees God as a very deep whirlpool, wide and exceedingly dark. In this abyss, all beings were included, crowded together and compressed. The darkness illuminated and penetrated everything. The unfathomable depth of the abyss was so high that no one could reach it. So God is this great big whirlpool and this darkness, this abyss that contains and illuminates, even though God is darkness, God illuminates every being that exists. God is that abyss. God is that darkness. There's that wonderful play with metaphors. God is a darkness giving light. This is the divine love, darkness beyond being, beyond all depths. And later in this same vision, she describes being swallowed by, lost in the divine abyss of incomprehensibility. She writes, swallowed by the unity in which the Trinity dwells, wherein one is lost. This is real mystical language here. Lost, she's already said this in our earlier poem, lost in the sweetness of love. She says, I wished to remain in his deepest abyss, alone in fruition. Meaning, I was really enjoying this. Fruition means enjoyment. She enjoyed being in the loving, silent abyss of God. It seems this can happen in any experience of prayer, and that it can become a stable state of unity with divine love. But how? Poem 26 can give us some guidance. I will approach love gladly if I have the power to reach the heart. But no one will sing there with me who mingles with creatures. Naked love who spares nothing in her wild death, stripped of all accident, recovers her simple unity. And love's pure abandon, no created good can subsist, for love strips of all form, those she receives in her simplicity. Free from all modes, strangers to every image, this is the true life of the poor in spirit. True poverty is not simply exile and begging for bread. The poor in spirit must live without notions in a vast simplicity, without end or beginning, without form, modality, reason or sense, neither opinion, thought, attention, nor knowing. One that is boundless and without limit. In this wild and wide simplicity, live the poor in spirit in unity. Nothing is there except silent emptiness, ever answering to eternity. I've had my say in a short poem, but the way is long as I well know, and those who want to finish the course endure much suffering. So how do we reach this unity with God? We let go of opinion, thought, attention, and knowing. We live without notions in a vast simplicity, a wild and wide simplicity. The pure love of the soul in her wild passing over is stripped of all images and recovers her simple unity. So being stripped of all images, that's the desperation, the desolation, the suffering associated with love. We are stripped of everything, especially what's going on between our two ears, right? Nudity, simplicity, purity, unity. These are synonyms for the end of the soul's quest, self-annihilation by love. The poor in spirit live in silence. The silence and emptiness beyond thinking. That's where love leads. That's where love abides. That's where love matures into unity. How does one come to even a temporary state of indistinct unity with the abyss, darkness, and love of God, inner silence? Love is wild, wide, boundless, a desert beyond all mental operations, transcending mind, experience, being itself. Thus, the soul in love with love has to go beyond everything. Mind, experience, being, everything. That's the madness. That's the madness of love. Give up everything. And we have countless examples of this, right? From Francis of Assisi to Hadewijch herself to name any saint, name any holy person. Doing what seems impossible, giving up what normal, well-mannered people consider to be treasures because it doesn't matter in the face of love. The indistinct unity with love occurs in a silence beyond thinking that she also describes as a wondrous annihilation. Now, I've said annihilation a few times, and we'll have another poem that makes that point. All these female mystics, these three Beguines, Hadewijch, Mechthild, and especially Margaret Porete, will talk about love as annihilation. Poem 38, Nothingness in Love. To be reduced to nothingness in love is the most desirable thing I know among all the works I have experience of, although I know it is beyond my reach. And if anyone there dares to fight love with longing, wholly without heart and without mind, and love counters this longing with her longing, that is the force by which we conquer love. Thenceforward, whether with joy or pain, if anyone can dare to fight love with ardor, love cannot resist the violence of the assault, but he shall abide firm in the storm, conformed to love. So she brings in sort of fighting language. Our task is to conquer love, but we do that without heart and without mind, meaning letting go of emotion, letting go of thinking. And then a pure desire for God is born. So what is her relevance as we come to the end of our first lecture here? Just a few thoughts. Absence of emotion does not mean an absence of love. Love involves a severe letting go, driving us out of our minds into God's abyss. Jesus' teachings, Jesus' life, it's all about this wild, wide, demanding, yet wholly enjoyable love that swallows us whole. And maybe we can linger there in terms of something to take away tonight. We say God is love, right? That's something we read in the scriptures. We talk about God's mercy and compassion. Do we really get what this love is all about? I would say we don't. Not at all. Not even close. Because we normally try and bring that love down into our experience, which is understandable, so we can get a handle on it. But the love of God is not something to get a handle on. It gets a handle on us and takes us. Just as another side idea here, to get that point across, maybe a mystic we can talk about in the future is someone who just died a few years ago. Her name is Ruth Burroughs. She's a Carmelite nun who lived in England. Great books, great books. And she has this wonderful metaphor that most people want a God who is like a pool in a seaside resort. So imagine you're on the beach, right? You're staying in a hotel. It's right on the beach, and the hotel has a nice pool. And then just beyond the pool is the ocean, right? Most people, well, I want the pool. The pool is controlled. The pool is man-made, right? The pool is not going to have waves, maybe very tiny ones that people are moving around. You know the depth. You can see the bottom. Everything about it is tailored to the human experience. But the ocean is wild and wide, and it can kill you. She says, that kind of God we don't want, but that's who God is. The kind of God whose love will kill our egos, you could say, who is so demanding and yet so enjoyable. Demands everything, but you will want to give up everything out of love for love. So love is annihilation. That's the ocean in the metaphor. Love is annihilation, the loss of all self in this God, as we abandon thinking, feeling, even the very fact that we're a distinct self. Love, and maybe this is an uncomfortable word, love absorbs us. And yet it not only keeps us unique, it makes us more ourselves. So this directs how we can live as Christians. Whatever we do, whatever we endure in love, for love, with love, is done in, for, and with God. Indeed, it is God. So start with intention. Love can start as intention. It can mature as that constant choice, right? That incessant burning of the will, and it's enjoyed in silence. So there is maybe a way we can start to intend to do something in your everyday life out of love for God. And out of love for maybe your neighbors, your family, your friends, whoever's in your life at this moment. But love matures as a constant choice. Sometimes it's patience, sometimes it's gentleness, sometimes it's firmness, right? Sometimes it's joy. Sometimes it's being present to somebody in their grief. It's all these different contours and textures that Hadewijch writes about in her poetry. So let's just take a quick moment of contemplative silence. And I'll lead you into another reading from Hadewijch, and then we'll have some questions, okay? So I invite you to close your eyes, take a big, deep breath, and just be with God for a few moments. And we'll go back to what I skipped over, letter 19, to have nothing but God. God be with you and give you true knowledge of the methods of love. May he enable you to understand what the bride says in the Song of Songs. I to my beloved, and my beloved to me. If anyone allowed love to conquer him, he would then conquer love completely. I hope this will be your experience. And although we are waiting long for the event, let us thank love for everything. He who wishes to taste veritable love, whether by random quest or sure attainment, must keep to neither path nor way. He must wander in search of victory over love, both on the mountains and in the valleys, devoid of consolation in pain and trouble. Beyond all the ways men can think of, that strong seed of love bears him. For reason cannot understand how love by love sees to the depths of the beloved. Perceiving how love lives freely in all things. Yes, when the soul has come to this liberty, the liberty that love can give, it fears neither death nor life. The soul wants the whole of love and wants nothing else. I leave rhyme. What my mind can say eludes me. For with nothing the mind says, can one put into words the theme of love, which I desire and want for you. I say no more. Here we are obliged to speak with our soul. Our theme is boundless. For this theme, love, which we take, is God himself by nature. Veritable love never had the restrictions of matter, but is free in the rich liberty of God, always giving in richness, and working with pride and growing in nobleness. But when God and the blessed soul are united, he, together with the blessed soul, will be exalted from the earth in all beauty. For when the soul has nothing else but God, and when it retains no will but lives exclusively according to his will alone, and when the soul is brought to naught, and with God's will, wills all that he wills, and is engulfed in him, and is brought to naught, then God is exalted above the earth, and then he draws all things to him. And so the soul becomes with him all that he himself is. One more big, deep breath. Amen. Okay, let me stop sharing here. I assure you I will share these slides with Peg and Lisa, and you can certainly have them if you'd like to read some more of Hadewijch. There's even a letter there that I left off at the end. And before questions, I forgot to mention this. You might have noticed in her poetry, Minna is feminine. Minna is a feminine noun. So she is calling God her. And yes, you can clearly see she calls God him. But when she's referring to God as love, it's always her. Love, you might remember in a few of those poems, is a lady, thinking of a noble lady. So this is clearly, she's not like I wouldn't say she's a proto-feminist in a way, but she's clearly comfortable going beyond male conceptions of God. Okay? So, with all that in mind, what's scratching on your noggins? What comments or questions do you have? What's tickling you about Hadewijch?
Rumi.
Rumi, yeah.
I
Yeah.
kept thinking Rumi.
Yeah, there you go. Very close, yeah.
When I was in Amsterdam, there was a Beguine in Amsterdam.
Oh, yeah?
And was pretty interesting story, particularly after the Reformation. It was the only Roman Catholic institution recognized by the government because they owned their own houses. And so they shut the church down, but the Beguines still lived in their houses. And the last one died in 1971.
Wow. So look at that. The movement endured.
Yeah, yeah, it was like a courtyard. And
Mhm.
the church actually was the church used by the pilgrims when they sojourned in Amsterdam before, coming to Massachusetts. And so
Wow.
it's now known as the Inglesey Kirk, but that was the original chapel in the Beguine.
Oh, wow. That's cool. Mhm.
So LJ, did they? I know they led a life of prayer. Obviously, she did, but you had also mentioned the Beguines and doing work in the community and other things. Does that? How did that work out in the? And it's not. It's not. I guess it's an order, but it's not an order like we normally think of.
Yeah. Well, we're not really sure. I mean, they just did work in the community. What it was, whether it was kind of the medical work they did that at that time, which wasn't really, what we know of today. Um, Maybe they comforted people. Maybe it was kind of more like a chaplaincy. Um, there was some teaching. Maybe I don't know that they taught children, but maybe they did. It's really not, we're not entirely sure, but they did some things out in the community. Maybe it was as simple as serving food, helping the poor. It's probably akin to things that the early Franciscans did, which was any sort of help with the poor. You can think of, Francis and Clare of Assisi going to the leper colony, and all they really did, I mean, they couldn't they couldn't cure their leprosy unless by a miracle. So what they wound up doing was just tending to their wounds. So that's probably something that Beguines did.
Yep.
Maybe not for lepers only, but for really anybody. Maybe there was somebody who needed help who, the 13th century equivalent of digging your car out of the snow. Is probably something they did, right? Yeah, we're not really sure. Healing, certainly teaching, but the teaching may have been restricted to other Beguines, or at least other women. So I don't know that Hadewijch's teachings ever, like she was ever in like a hall with a bunch of guys. That in the Middle Ages, like, no, 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 we don't like that. Now, did her ideas probably seeped out anyway? How did they get out? Not sure. Maybe copies of some of her poems. Some of the, especially one of the poems we read, sounds a little like some things that Meister Eckhart would say. So I can't imagine he didn't somehow come across her. And in her own time, there were probably others who came across her. Hey,
Yeah.
Barb, what's up?
Yeah, I noticed LJ a couple times in some of the readings that you were doing. There's one in particular, and I didn't write it down, so it's not an exact quote, but she said something to the effect of, "I am the Trinity, I am God, I am Jesus, I am the Holy Spirit."
Yeah.
That seems like grounds for trouble back in the 13th century.
Yeah,
Did she
would have
ever
been.
run across the authorities?
She didn't. When you know it, she didn't run across them. Later, Beguines did,
Mhm.
especially someone we're going to talk about in 2 weeks. But it wasn't unknown that the Beguines were. I think even there might have been someone in her own generation. Again, we're not entirely sure when she died. I would surmise she's at least, if she's not dead, she's at least maybe retired by 1250.
Okay.
She might have already passed beyond life at that point, but somewhere between 1200 and 1250, there is a case of a Beguine being tried as a heretic.
Yeah, okay.
But this is probably what saved her. Her writings were probably not just well known. Yeah, that I think you're very right, Chris. That would have been cause for, an inquisitor
Yeah.
to come and pay her a visit. Yeah.
Yeah, nowadays we're like, oh, that's cool, but back then, not so much,
Not so much back then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Barb.
Yeah, I was just going to say, one of the things that they possibly did was take meals to people who couldn't get food. And I'm thinking even now of what people in Minneapolis do for their neighbors. They take them food, and that would be a major service. I mean, they didn't have
Yeah.
Meals on Wheels, so they needed that service. Uh, and I can see that kind of thing. Um, and it's doubly hard because they had to get the food or get stuff. And sometimes they had to do that by begging. Sometimes they did it by whatever their work was. But and then whoever was asking about getting in, was it Marguerite who was burned at the stake? So
She was.
yeah, they did get in trouble with the church. And that may have been part of why they kind of died down, because they were actively persecuted by the church. And
Yeah.
and of course, as you talked about what they did, and I mean how they conducted themselves, they were a threat to the authority of the church and to patriarchy. So not surprising. I mean, Marguerite's the one that I know about, but I'm sure that there were more, and some that we don't even know about.
There were probably many we don't know about. Yeah, fortunately.
And women in those times were very knowledgeable about the healing properties of plants. And they got in trouble for that too. That somehow posed a threat, and the healing went into the monasteries, and the women who attempted to use the very same methods were branded as witches and burned at the stake. There was a woman's Holocaust that killed more people than the Holocaust we're familiar
Yeah.
with.
Yeah. 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 Medieval church was not averse to violence. Let's just say that. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Russ.
Yeah, it's been brought up a couple times. The one in Amsterdam was an almshouse. As to what they did, they referred
Right.
to the Beguine in Amsterdam as an almshouse. So I would take it that it was run similar to a modern day mission, where, yeah, they served food and possibly provided lodging and stuff.
Yeah, that's probably what it was. Yeah, and as we've already mentioned, they may have had different services, from beguinage to beguinage, right, from house to house,
Yeah.
because they didn't live in a monastery or a church. They lived
No.
in a regular house, and
Yeah,
sometimes
it was
they were
like
near.
a courtyard. It was like a courtyard, and they all circled the courtyard in the chapel. The church was in the courtyard.
And again, this arose just as towns were coming together, because the Europe was just coming out of a period of being a lot more agrarian, and cities and towns were starting to come together by 1200. So the Beguines were women living in towns, and so likely, and maybe this is true of Hadewijch. She had money and had a house and invited other women to live with her, but in a really remarkably free way. I can't think of another movement in the church, male or female, that was as free in this regard. I mean, the church recognized them, but early on, and grew uncomfortable with them later. But early on, there was support, and I mean, maybe it was partly support and others partly saying, do what you want, and kind of dismissive. But, the Franciscans and the Dominicans actively supported them. Meister Eckhart was a spiritual director for several Beguine communities. So this was not a this was a strong movement. In fact, there were many. This is what really prompted the church to go after them. They just started springing up everywhere. When it was a contained little thing and just in Holland, well, okay, that's fine. But it sort of spread to Germany, and Austria. They even came to Italy. Oh my God. So yeah, but I can't think of another movement. Maybe until the Catholic worker in the church. I mean, or just maybe the Protestant Reformation. I don't know. Yeah.
LJ, you mentioned that she might have been a noblewoman, so that means like she would have some monetary means, but do we know that like most of these women had like personal wealth that poured into this, or like how do they, subsist basically, or do we know?
We're not entirely sure, but that's the general historical assumption,
Okay.
is that there was probably at least one person who had the house, or they were gifted a house, and that's not something we could dismiss either, because they may have been a community of women of less than noble means, or not from the nobility, but they were recognized as having this radical spiritual commitment. And maybe, a local nobleman said, "Oh, I have this house in the town, take it."
Hmm.
So it's likely that whatever the house was likely came from somebody who had means,
Okay.
whether it was a Beguine who lived with them or somebody else. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other comments? Questions? Is love this demanding in your own lives? It is in mine.
Yeah. You have a bundle
Good
of kids. So.
On
was
good
that?
days.
All good things? Yeah.
On good days.
On good days. On the bad days, it's more demanding.
Less demanding.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if I notice it more in this conversation than in others, but there's there's this, I don't know, I want to say brightness of love, that love is everything and everywhere and is all wonderful. And yet most of the ways that I hear talking about it are the darkness. So it's interesting that she had such an ability to sort of embrace the darkness and the depth and the abyss. We don't hear as much sort of balance with the light. We hear, it seems like we hear more about the abyss in this.
The psalm says, darkness and light to you are both alike.
Mm.
Um, I think there's something there
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it could also be that love is so deep, it goes beyond light or dark. It's just and present in both, right? Yeah. But we tend to hear about love's sweetness, the passion, the eroticism, but it's for Hadewijch way more than that. And that's not necessarily enough to keep love going. So that's why I want you to keep in mind that one phrase. Let me see if I can get it real quick here.
About
That
the
phrase,
incessant
the incessant
act
burning
of the will.
of the will.
Exercise of burning will.
The
Thank you.
incessant exercise of burning will. Thank you. There it is. That's a pretty good, easy to get description of the practice, you might say, the practice of love.
Another thing that reminded me of is how often in scripture we think of the refiner's fire
Yes, there you go.
all the
Yeah.
way through. So I kept thinking of that.
Yeah, and for Hadewijch, the refiner's fire is love.
Yes, exactly.
What refines you? I mean,
Yeah.
just think of the people in your community who I'm sure you love, but who sometimes they piss you off, or they just annoying sometimes, or I don't know. It's okay. That's when love is going through this purification. I have to actively choose patience or gentleness when I don't want to. There's the stripping. There's the annihilation. She uses strong language because she's passionate. That's why she's using such strong language. And love is so overwhelming and demanding.
And it gets your attention that way.
Right. She certainly got my attention. Other comments? Questions?
Just maybe a big thank you, LJ.
My pleasure.
Maine.
I'm glad
Thanks everybody for being here.
glad you could get to know this rather obscure Christian mystic.
Yeah.
Stay
Thank
tuned.
you
We'll
for
let you.
helping to set this up, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Peg, Chris. It's a, takes a village kind of situation.
But
That
thank you,
does.
Lisa.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa. You're very
Thank you,
good.
Lisa. Thank you,
Well,
LJ.